everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video we have a follow-up to my eyeshadow palette collection video where I was going to use a different eyeshadow palette every single day. Now I have circulated my way through my entire eyeshadow palette collection. So the way I'm going to do this follow-up video is a ranking style, and I'm going to do my top 5, bottom 5 of all my eyeshadow palettes. I've not taken into account in this ranking any palettes that I tried for the first time this month, because I don't think just trying an eyeshadow palette once gives you a true representation of the palette. I've really enjoyed doing this kind of challenge that I set myself, and I've loved reaching into a different eyeshadow palette every single day. Kept my palette stored in my FabFitFun box because that is the perfect size box to store all my eyeshadow palettes, and because of the way the lid shuts over, so I'm not constantly seeing the next eyeshadow palettes that are coming up. And I've tried to avoid looking, and each day I've just reached in and gone for the one that's at the front and then done my eye look, and the next day so on. So it's been really good and a nice surprise as to what eyeshadow palette I'm pulling out, and I think for me this is probably the way forward. So what I've decided I'm going to do is I wanted to do this ranking video as an immediate follow-up to me going through my box of eyeshadow palettes once, but I think I am going to ultimately do an eyeshadow palette declutter. Obviously the ones that are featured in the bottom 5 are ones that are kind of on the cusp as to whether I should keep them or not. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do another go round, as it were, and I'm going to do another rotation of my entire eyeshadow palette collection, and then I will do an eyeshadow palette declutter as the follow-up to that, because there probably are a few that I could do with getting rid of. So what I will do is I will start with the bottom 5 and then end on a high note with the top 5 that I've loved using. So starting with the eyeshadow palette that I've enjoyed the least, this is the Makeup Revolution Ocean's Treasure palette. It's one that I bought solely for the packaging, and I actually purchased 2. I did get one that was heart-shaped as well, but I don't dislike that one as much as I dislike this one. It is solely for the formula because I do love the packaging. Well, I say I do love the packaging. I hate the pan sizes. They are an absolute nightmare to be able to get a brush into, and also if I am applying a shimmer with my finger, it's really hard to get your finger into the pans as well because of the shape of them and because of the size of them. So that's one bad thing that goes against it. Formula wise, it's not the best. It is iHeart Revolution as opposed to Makeup Revolution, and I think the iHeart Revolution is possibly slightly cheaper than the Revolution. I know it is pretty much one and the same brand, but the couple of things that I've tried from iHeart Revolution have been a little bit more cheaper than Makeup Revolution or Revolution Beauty, whatever it's called now. It is such a shame that this palette isn't good because it's got a great theme about it. Obviously the packaging, Polly Pocket vibes, it takes me back to my childhood, and the colour scheme is really nice, but I can't get on board with the formula. The main shades that I kind of dip into for my crease are either Kraken or Driftwood, but they do take a bit of blending because they are quite patchy, and then if you go too far they kind of blend away to nothing. For my outer corner, the main one I tend to go for is Shipwreck. I've used Deep Blue Sea a couple of times, but because that is a deep navy, that one is terribly patchy, so Shipwreck is probably the only one that I can tend to reach for. So on the day that I use this, I created a look using Kraken, Shipwreck and also Mother of Pearl. I think Mother of Pearl is probably my favourite shade in this palette, but it does take a lot of building to feel like I need to apply it sort of wet, which then has now led to hard pan in the palette. So it's not been my favourite one to reach for, most definitely, and it did annoy me trying to get the products out the pan. Whether I could actually declutter this one, I'm not too sure because I still do love the packaging. So I don't know about this one, but it's one that I enjoyed using the least. The next one is the Wet n Wild Walking on Eggshells palette, and this has always been one of my go-to sort of travel palettes. If I'm going on a night out after work, I will stick this in my handbag because it comes with 2 little brushes. Yeah, okay, they're not the best, it's your sponge applicator and then a little brush, but it's still handy to have everything in one go. But the day that I used this, I just was not feeling it at all. I didn't appreciate before about the lack of a matte crease shade. I know this is the old formula and they have since reformulated it to include transition shades, but it's never really annoyed me until now, and I ended up kind of putting the middle shade in the crease and in the outer corner, but wasn't really dark enough for the outer corner. I then put this over the second part of the lid and then this on the inner part of the lid. and I felt like it just looked a little bit washed out. There also was quite a bit of fallout, which I don't remember from previous uses. So it was just okay. I didn't absolutely hate it, but it just annoyed me. So I do kind of want to try the newer formula with the transition shade because I do like the travel friendliness of it. But it just didn't do anything for me this time that I used this. This one was a bit of a miss. Next we have, unfortunately, another item from Makeup Revolution. This is the Emily Edit The Want palette. I'm so upset to be including this in here because this at one time was one of my favourite eyeshadow palettes, but I feel like the quality of the shadows has deteriorated terribly. I don't know how well it will show on camera, but a lot of the shimmer shades, if not most of them, have hit hard pan. It's also really awkward to hold up because it is heavy. I have to sort of hold it awkward like this because it's really awkward to hold up with the mirror being so large, but pretty much as all of the shimmer shades have got some form of hard pan in them. The cream hasn't, but that's not a shade to reach for too much. And Side Hustle, the dark green over here, is still okay, but all the ones that I reach for a lot have kind of got hard pan in them. When I was regularly using this palette and loving on it, I never had to go into the shimmers with a wet brush or anything like that. It was just using my finger. And obviously I appreciate that I will have oils and things on my finger, but I've only noticed in other palettes that I have that when I go in with perhaps setting spray or something on my finger or on a brush, that's when I tend to hit hard pan. But I know full well with these I've only ever gone in with a dry finger, so it is a bit disappointing, but it means that the palette just doesn't perform like it did when I first purchased it. I know it wasn't the most high-end purchase I've ever made. It was an affordable palette and it is Makeup Revolution, but I was really holding out hopes that I would love it because it was Makeup Revolution and because I love Emily Noel. Some was kind of just too much hard work because of the hard pan, and I think I ended up having to go in with quite a few different shades. My go-to crease colour is always Prayer up here. I went into the outer corner with Jew's Paid, and then for my lid I went in with Pizzazz, Eve Rose and Belle Violet to try and get some sort of colour payoff on the shimmers. So yeah, this one has become a bit of a miss, and I don't know if I've got the patience and the effort to go over and try and resuscitate all of the pans that have hit hard pan. So considering I say at one time it was one of my favourite eyeshadow palettes. Next we have the Huda Beauty Amethyst Obsessions palette, and this is obviously the purple toned one, and I purchased this because I was desperate to try one of the Obsessions palettes and I couldn't decide which of the shades to go for out of the gemstone collection. But now I think about it, I probably should have just gone for the original Mauve Obsessions or even the Topaz Obsessions if I was going to get a gemstone one. Purples just don't do it for me. I've got a few palettes which have purples in. I try to make them work, and normally when I reach for this palette I tend to just reach in for one shade. So that's why I'm really glad I kind of did this challenge / experiment, because it made me only reach for this one palette. So on any given day I couldn't reach for another palette and I had to make a look using all purples. And say the past few times I've used this, I've only used 1 or 2 shades from it. So that's what made me really struggle with it. I've put it at number 7 because it is a really pretty palette, and formula wise it's definitely not the worst. The shades don't perform too badly. I do just have to blend them a little bit more than other palettes that I have, and also every single one of the shimmer shades in the middle creates some sort of fallout. The middle one here is probably the worst culprit. This bottom one's not too bad. So what I went in with on the day I used this was I went for this shade in my crease, I then went for this top shade in my outer corner, and then I went for this shade all over the lid. Not too dark and dramatic, but definitely more dark and dramatic than I usually go into the office wearing. Yet this palette's turned into a bit of a regret. I just need to learn that I don't do purple eyeshadow without looking like I've been punched in the face. And then the final palette in my bottom 5, so palette number 6, is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Norvina palette. So this is an absolutely gorgeous palette. It has so many pretty shades in it. I just don't think I'm good enough at eyeshadow to use it. I find that this palette is pretty intimidating. All of the mattes in this palette are quite pigmented and it does take quite a bit of work to blend them out, and I've not quite learned the best technique to do that. I always find with this one I end up with the point at which I put the dark shade is where it stays, and I really struggle to blend it out. I honestly don't think that it's the quality of the palette, I think it's just user error. And it is such a shame, although possibly a blessing, because I've gone to purchase the Soft Glam and the Sultry palette numerous times, but because I struggle to work with this one, it's put me off purchasing them. With regards to the shimmers, every single one of these shimmers is absolutely stunning, but they are so soft. I like to go in with my shimmer all over the lid with my finger, and I have to barely touch my finger into this pan, and I've got quite a lot of product on it, so it is quite hard work to use this palette. I have created quite a few nice looks out of it, but it's took a lot of work to get there, and of a morning I don't really have time to work with this palette. So I found the past couple of times I had it in my everyday makeup drawer, I would only reach for it if I was going for a night out. I wouldn't reach for it for going to work because I knew I didn't have enough time to create a decent look out of it. Or if it did, I would just tend to go with an all matte look because that was slightly easier than trying to work with one of the shimmer shades. I do notice with this palette as well, there is a lot of fallout with the shimmer shades. So I always need to remember when using this palette, if I'm wearing foundation, I need to do my eyes first. So it is a shame because it's a gorgeous palette to look at. The formula is really good. I just don't think it's for me. With regards to what shades I used on the day I used it, I went into my crease with Incense. I went into Volatile in my outer corner, and then I think the shimmer shade I used was Dreamer. So now on to my top 5 palettes, starting with number 5. This is the BH Cosmetics Sylvia Garni palette, and this was actually a palette that I received as a free gift. I think I only had to spend £15 or buy 3 products or something from BH Cosmetics on Beauty Bay, and I got this palette for free. I'd had my eye on this palette since it was released, but because it was sort of £21 and I'd not heard of the collaborator and things like that, and I technically didn't need it, I'd never pushed the button on it. But I do absolutely love this palette. It does remind me colour story wise of the Urban Decay palette. I always forget if it's Born to Run or Born This Way. I think it's Born to Run, with the sort of darker tones here with then the few neutrals, but this has quite a few more neutrals than that one does. But I do like how versatile this palette is. These shades down the side can be used as face highlighters, but I've also used them on my eyes as well. And I think the day I used this, I actually did use Opal here on my lid. If I can remember rightly, because this is one of the first ones that I used, I think I went into my crease with Obsessed, my outer corner with Rebel, and then I think I went over my lid with Opal. And I do really like the formula of most BH Cosmetics palettes that I've tried. I think I own 3 now, but this is probably my favourite formula out of the 3, and this is one of the more expensive BH Cosmetic palettes that I have. I think the other 2 are around £15, where I say this one's 21, so I don't know if this has a slightly better formula to it. But overall, this is a great go-to palette, and I think if you don't have a big collection, it would be a good one to pick up because it is really good and performed really well. So I'm so glad that I was able to add this one to my collection, and even more of a bonus that it was for free. In at number 4, we have the Iby Beauty City Limits palette. This is a palette that I got in a Tribe Beauty box last year. I'd never heard of the brand Iby Beauty, and this was my first experience of them. And obviously, for the fact I've ranked them at number 4, I did really enjoy this palette. It is a slightly deeper tone palette than I tend to go for, but for some reason I never have any issues working with this. Okay, I definitely do have my go-to shades in this one, which are the ones I used to create the look on that day. I went in with Playlist on my crease, Glamping in my outer corner, and then all over the lid with Nightfall. Nightfall is a gorgeous champagne colour, and the colour payoff is great. I've gone so far as I've actually rubbed off, I think the word City Limits were on that one, and I've rubbed them off because I've used that shade that much. This shade Fire and Ice here is a really nice dark duochrome, and I do really love duochrome eyeshadows, so that is definitely a hit for me. There are obviously a couple of shades in here, like this Backstage, that I think I've only ever reached for once, but for a dark blue, they perform pretty well. I find with those type of colours they can tend to come across quite patchy, but that one blended out no problem. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this palette, and because I'd never heard of the brand before, I didn't know what to expect, so this one definitely surprised me. I have actually looked since to see if I could possibly find something else from the brand, maybe another eyeshadow palette or something like that, on any of the UK websites that I order from, but I couldn't. And when I mentioned this, it might have actually been in the eyeshadow palette collection video, they commented on my Instagram post to say it's really nice to see our palette in your collection, and I actually commented back to them to say, do you stock in the UK? To which they did confirm that unfortunately you don't, but this is a brand I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for in the future because I would like to try something else from them. Number 3, we have the Juvia's Place Nubian palette. This is definitely one of my go-to everyday nudes palettes. If I'm wanting a simple look without much thought, this is the one that I reach for. This is also the palette that I reach for if I'm ever going to a wedding, because of the neutral shades and things like that. It is great for any kind of outfit that you will wear for a wedding, and also the longevity of these shadows is outstanding. This shade here is probably my go-to olive crease shade, and as with a lot of eyeshadows, primer or no primer, when I apply a shimmer all over my lid, by the end of the day it's mainly just left in the inner corner but mainly gone from the rest of my lid. This shade stays in place for the majority of the day over all my lid with the intensity at which it looked first thing in the morning, so it is great and definitely one of my favourite shades in my entire collection. Speaking of which, I'm thinking of doing a video about my favourite shades from palettes. I didn't know whether to do my favourite shade from every palette or just pick a selection of say 20 shades and perhaps create my dream eyeshadow palette. I've seen Samantha March and things by the Berg do something similar, and I thought it might be quite fun to do. Back to this one, and I think the shades I used were this one in the crease, this one in the outer corner, and then this one over the lid. In at number 2, we have the e.l.f. New Classics palette. This palette is another one that quite surprised me. I tried another one of their palettes like this, which the name escapes me at the moment. I think it's Opposites Attract, and I wasn't a massive fan of that, to be honest, but I think it was possibly because it was more of a darker palette, and I do like more lighter neutrals, whereas this kind of ticks all the boxes. It has got the darker shades, but then it has got some more lighter shades in there and is very versatile. There's one shade in here that did surprise me that I didn't think I'd love as much as I do, and that is the shade Platinum down here. So this is it's really hard to describe, but it's definitely not like anything I think I have in my collection. It's more of like an antique gold, but a really cool toned one. And I also love the shade Gilded here, which is not lime green as such, but it definitely has green undertones to it and is such a pretty shade. And I think the day that I did this, I went in with Charmer, because I can still see the fallout around the pan. Charmer in my crease, and then I think I went in with Muse in my outer corner, and then I either went in with Gilded or Platinum. Sometimes I do the two shades together, sometimes I just do one or the other, but they're definitely my most reach for shades. And say this is a palette that I absolutely love and is really affordable. I think it's about £14. So if you haven't tried anything from e.l.f. and you are looking to have a look at one of their palettes, I would definitely recommend giving this one a go. They do have, I think, 3 in this collection now. They have this one, they have the Opposite Attract one, and then I think they have one that is either Earth and Sea or Land and Sea or something like that, which is blue and green tones. But yeah, really recommend it. Formula's great, they blend really easily, you get a decent amount of colour payoff. I never have to go in with a wet brush, and I just generally love the colour story of this one. And then my number 1 palette that I used this month was my OG Urban Decay Naked Original palette. I'd completely forgotten how much I love this palette, and I don't know whether I've ranked it at number 1 because it gave me such nostalgic feels, or because I did genuinely enjoy using it, or both. But this is such a great palette. I mean, I can see why it was a holy grail palette for so long, and I think it has now been officially discontinued, but so many people still have it in their collection, and I think people did stockpile it before it did get discontinued, and I can see why. This is a palette where I open it and I don't even have to think. I know where I can go for what look that I want. There's probably 3 or 4 go-to looks that I have in this palette. I don't go for my smoky look very often, but it's there if I need it, kind of thing. And this is a palette where doing a smoky look doesn't intimidate me as much as it does in other palettes. This is one that I use more towards the tail end of the month because this had been in my everyday makeup drawer the month before. I think it was actually this that did spark me to do that challenge, because it made me realise how long it had been since I reached for this and how much I wanted to continually try and use my different palettes. My go-to look in this is Book in the crease, Hustle in the outer corner, and then Sin or Sidecar over the lid. But I know the day I used this, I used Sin. The only issue I have with this is I wish Hustle was a matte shade. It doesn't have an awful lot of shimmer to it, but it is a kind of shimmer, maybe classed as like a sequin shade. A true matte, like the same formula as Book but darker, would make this the perfect eyeshadow palette. But like I say, I can see why it's so many people's holy grail palettes, because it is amazing, and I'm so glad that I pulled it back out and gave it some more love, because it's just great, and it's the palette that I've enjoyed reaching for the most in the past month. So that is my top 5, bottom 5 of my eyeshadow palette collection. Are there any palettes here that you would rank in a different place to where I ranked them? Let me know in the comments below. So like I said, I'm going to do another rotation of my collection, and then I think I'll follow that one up with an eyeshadow palette declutter. But that is it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. Thanks.